So I should say a sense of belonging is definitely something that people who have voluntarily moved develop much easier and faster very often compared to people who had to find a new homeland in a new country without being properly psychologically prepared for that, or even without absorbing that idea in the very first place. So I should say when we're moving abroad, there are multiple ways to create the sense of belonging.
Do you think that we should have to mix these two both in order for us to feeling more self-confidence in the way that we are getting in to be adapted to this new country?
So I think there is always a good question whether we are pushing ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone, opening up ourselves to the local people, to the local community, to other expats, or we are just trying to, be honest with ourselves, confirming that maybe that's not the time yet.
She is Kristina Roppelt, an expert in intercultural communication with years of experience living and working across the globe. In this episode, we had a conversation about how understanding different cultures can shape our identities and empower us to build more authentic personal brands. Kristina doesn't just talk about diversity, she lives it, working with global teams and leading her own international company. She offers practical advice on how to navigate cultural differences and how those differences can strengthen our personal and professional identities. So whether you are looking to expand your global awareness, build a stronger personal brand, or simply embrace new perspectives, this conversation is packed with insights you won't want to miss. So grab your coffee or tea, sit back and enjoy the conversation. Welcome to the Brilliantly Branded Podcast. Welcome one more time to the Brilliantly Branded Podcast. Our purpose is women empowerment through the lens of branding. And in today's episode, it's going to be all about understanding cultures and shaping identities. What I am looking for achieve in this episode actually is for us to learn part of the key to build this authentic personal branding in the sense of having this intercultural communication. So my guest today is Kristina Roppelt. She is an expert in intercultural communication and she have experience living and working across the globe. She have been from Silicon Valley to South Korea. Kristina have a master, or she is a master in the art of connecting with people from diverse backgrounds. She will share with us how cultural and understanding all these cultural environments can really shape and enhance our not just personal branding, but our way to live and to belong to a community and really be part of that. So my first thing is, Kristina, welcome to the Brilliantly Branded Podcast. And let's start by having you introduce yourself and share a bit about your journey with us.
Thank you very much, Maria. And thank you very much, all the listeners of this episode. It's a pleasure to be your guest today. And answering your question about how I usually introduce myself, I usually say that I'm an intercultural consultant who helps people of different diverse backgrounds to work together efficiently and, what's most importantly, to understand each other. A very important part of my identity is also that I'm an entrepreneur. For 8 years, I've been in charge of my own company called Agency for International Cooperation. Well, my team is also based all over the world. And as you've rightfully mentioned, I've lived and worked across different places. So I also identify myself as a global citizen and a global trotter, which I believe is a very important part of my identity.
Well, thank you for sharing your experience with that, and actually belong somewhere is part of our identity. So my first question will be, how do you currently identify yourself? So where are you from? Where do you belong? Probably most importantly.
Yeah, I love this question. Where do you belong? I think it's one of the greatest questions that actually helps people start speaking about the geographies or cultures that are most important to them right now, rather than answering where they currently live or where they were born. So people may choose to speak about their formative culture, where they were raised, or the culture which is the most resonating to them right now. These days, I should say that to me, the question has become a bit more tricky. And when somebody's asking me, where are you from? Or what country you come from? And it's a normal question for an expat living in a foreign country. I usually start answering the question with a phrase that might be concerning for some people, but I usually say, oh, that's a difficult or that's a challenging question these days. And in some eyes, I see immediate understanding. And in some eyes, I see a fear or even an astonishment or something like, what can be challenging about that question? Then I explain that I'm originally Russian, but I currently live in Denmark, and I have had different multiple experiences living abroad. And as you may imagine, the Russian experience, as well as certain other experiences these days, certain identifications with national cultures, may be alarming, alerting, toxic, or somehow unpleasant for some people. But that's always a question of perspective, how you choose to perceive that. So I really try to ensure people see me first and foremost rather than my passport or the country where I was born. And I never try to hide that in a dialogue saying that, oh, I'm a Danish person. Not really. I am definitely born and raised in Russia. This is my formative culture, but there are multiple other identities that I carry, and I also want to speak about them. So instead of just saying, well, this is one word, this is my citizenship or nationality, this is my passport, I usually try to reveal a little bit of a bigger picture to kickstart a more balanced conversation, let's put it this way.
That is interesting because actually it's a matter of let yourself know to others, be open about not just where you are coming from, but how you have been adapted. And I said adapted because I know that the process when you go abroad is a process that you need to really assume from your side. Okay, I'm going abroad. I have this purpose, but I need to be adapted to the place where I arrive. So then is when you build a sense of belonging. And belong is something that for me is a big topic. I mean, it's a big word, and basically is how we build that belong based on the experience that we share with others. So I will love you to share with us how have been your experience actually, because you have been living abroad for long enough to know that when you are surrounded by foreign people.
Absolutely. I think what you're raising in your question is a fantastic point about whether people choose to go abroad or whether this is actually a result of a circumstance. And I think that the experience of a voluntary move to a different country versus involuntary move that was sparkled by a political circumstance or maybe a terrible climatic or a natural disaster situation, or maybe a forced move by another, power that you have no under your control, is a little bit of a different experience. So I should say a sense of belonging is definitely something that people who have voluntarily moved develop much easier and faster very often compared to people who had to find a new homeland in a new country without being properly psychologically prepared for that, or even without absorbing that idea in the very first place. So I should say when we're moving abroad, there are multiple ways to create the sense of belonging. And with the development of new technology, there are actually some ways to feel the semi-belonging in a new place. And I'll explain what I mean. So traditionally, when we assume we belong somewhere, we feel that we are building a circle of connections in a new place. We start having new acquaintances, new maybe friends if we're lucky. We start shaping a community around ourselves. We network, etc. However, these days, there are multiple other ways to make sure you belong in a new place without actually fully integrating into the local society. And I'm sure you're aware of the situations when expats move to a new country and they keep communicating in a circle that comes from their own culture or country, being kind of capsulated inside their local community. So an Indian person might move from India to the US, but keep working, communicating, and socializing within the Indian community solely. There is another way to feel that you belong, but at the same time, again, without adapting and integrating in a new place. For instance, you might still stay in touch with your friends, colleagues, partners, etc., from your home country over online communication by Zooming, Skyping, FaceTiming, whatever you prefer. So this is a good question, whether people who have just chosen to stay fully integrated in their previous life, but physically live in a new place, whether they have fully integrated. But to me, it's just very important to identify that not all people who end up in a new foreign country actually decide to belong to a new place.
Well, part of another question that coming from that you explain is, do you think that we should have to mix these two both in order for us to feeling more self-confidence in the way that we are getting in to be adapted to this new country? Or how do you suggest that should be happen?
I suggest that there should be no violence over yourself in any circumstance. And I'm sure you are aware of multiple examples when migrants bring their parents to a new country at a quiet, respectful age. Let's say I have a very close person of mine who has brought her mother to the US, and the mom is at the age of 89, yes. So she has voluntarily chosen not to integrate into the local society because she felt that would be too much of a pressure for herself, because she is an established person in an established age, and she feels much more comfortable communicating with her friends from her native country, from her home country, and deciding not to completely dramatically change her life, because that would be some sort of a violence over her current state of health, current mental state, etc., etc. So I think there is always a good question whether we are pushing ourselves a little bit beyond our comfort zone, opening up ourselves to the local people, to the local community, to other expats, or we are just trying to, be honest with ourselves, confirming that maybe that's not the time yet. So I always recommend people to ask themselves very honestly whether this is just a fear of a foreign culture or this resistance to something new, or that's really a need to first off take care of yourself and make sure that you make sure you're established mentally and feel comfortable to open up to new people and ideas. Because obviously, no matter what age you create this new circle of acquaintances and friends, it's always challenging, even for the youngest. I'm sure people who have moved with children would appreciate that point.
Well, is you make me remember a comment that I heard very recently, and now that I am in front of an expert in intercultural communication, I need to ask you that. And it was something like, when you go abroad, 1 year is the equivalent of 4 years in your own country. So I don't know if that is a urban myth or what is this is about, but actually that make me think many things around. And I will love to have your concept about that. What do you think? Do you think that this is true or this is not true?
I would need to say I would love to make a double check of the source where this comes from. And I wonder if this is actually an academic, scientific research that not at all. It's just
No,
a
just,
proverb.
I
Just a
mean,
saying.
this, yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if there is a research on that, and if people have actually calculated the number of connections created over a certain period of time. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. But to comment on that, I would say that, again, it very much depends on your approach and your openness to the new. As I've mentioned, plenty of people would move, stick to their partner, stick to the community that has been left behind over the phone, and not even make an acquaintance to their nearest neighbors. And they would stay in this bubble or capsula, whatever you want to call that. So there are cases like that. Obviously, they are most extreme cases, but still, I should definitely say that if a person is open to something new, and if the move is also connected to their studies or work, there is ultimately not just the number of connections that is growing, but also the number of experiences that is growing in a geometrical or exponential progression, let's put it this way. Because things that we see as our routine in our normal daily life in the country which we're used to, not necessarily should be our country of birth, but in the country where we used to, where we're established, where we're settled, suddenly turns into something very different. You really don't know where to get the best bread. You really don't know how to organize the best online purchases and shopping for your child. You really don't know what's the best way to fix the pipe. You really don't know what's the best way to maybe suggest a little gift to your neighbor over Christmas if they celebrate Christmas. And that's a very good question as well. So suddenly there are like dozens and hundreds of questions puzzling around you, and you need to always find the capacity to answer them in a new country. So I would definitely say maybe not even 4 years, maybe 10 years may pass within one if you are definitely open to such experiences.
Exactly. And for me, it has been such a positive impact because I think that I have been growing 4 times, or in your case, 10 times faster than if I had been just staying in my country. So for me, it has been challenging in my own experience. But as well, I have been feeling that the way that I have been growing is evident. So I'm really, really happy about that. And what you say is really true. And connecting this with the reasons why you end up being interesting and growing in the topic of intercultural communication, could you share that with us? How did you arrive there?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you allow me, like a super quick follow up on top of what you've said about growth, I do believe that one of the best key factors of growth of a professional who moves into a new country is a new understanding of how professionalism is being identified in a new place. Let me give you an example. There are certain cultures which definitely prioritize practical experience over theoretical knowledge or papers or academic background. And I would not like to, call names and say, oh, this is the American culture 100%. No, there are multiple industries within the US that would definitely prioritize a theoretical diploma over practical experience. But let's say there are certain industries in certain countries that prioritize practical experience over theory, and vice versa. In certain countries, there would be an absolute must to have a certain recognition of a theoretical institution or a connection to a university or a business school. In the other countries, what would matter is actually your connectivity with the professional community, your engagement with the local opinion leaders. So suddenly, when you find yourself in a very new environment, you understand that your professionalism has to be backed, has to be supported by a number of different factors. And that's where you also start growing, gaining the things that you lacked in the previous country where you worked. So sorry about that
No,
intervention.
fantastic. No, not sorry. I think it's a very valuable information, and thank you for sharing that. Yes.
So moving on to your question about where I grew interested in that. So
Mm.
originally, as a student, I was studying international relations, and I was definitely looking forward to earning a little bit money because I had to move to Moscow from a place where I was born, and it definitely was much more expensive than my hometown. And yeah, I didn't come from a rich family, so had a single parent. I definitely was looking for the opportunities to work, and I started doing translations, then interpretations, and finally real life interpretations, so simultaneous interpretations.
Yeah.
And whenever I worked with different delegations, with different opinion leaders, with different professors, experts, I was really astonished by the fact that you might have a perfect interpretation or you might have a great understanding in terms of language, but the audience would still not be convinced or satisfied by the style of the communication, by the visual slides and visual assistance, by the actual deal on the table, by the proposal, by the order of events, how the conference, for example, or the negotiations were organized. So there were definitely some hidden things behind the lines, behind the actual verbal communication that I started noticing and collecting at the back of my mind as a little database of different cases, why people didn't actually come to an agreement or why they started seeming to each other a little bit alien. So by doing this meta collection of cases, I started digging deeper into that topic, reading more about this, talking to people, asking them about the reasons why certain things didn't happen. And I was shocked by how tiny little nuances from the way how people didn't offer each other coffee or said a very quick goodbye by the end of the meeting without offering any follow-up has actually influenced the perception over each other. Because in fact, when we meet at a conference, at an event, at an exhibition for negotiations, the time we spend together with a representative of a different culture is actually very limited.
Yeah.
And what we have is usually not just the first impression, let's say, but maybe a few hours or a few days of an interaction. And this is the only material you use in your brain to create an image of another person, to make a projection of how reliable this or that business partner, academic partners, project partner would be to you.
Yeah.
And we definitely need to learn a little bit more about how to ensure that this communication is more smooth. So, yeah, I think what keeps me intrigued in this area is every time, every next year, every new culture, every new event I attend, I still keep seeing those details that I have noticed before that can actually play a role and that can actually differ from culture to culture, even though
Yeah.
you would think like, this is like the most basic human nature. Why wouldn't you expect that from everyone? But you
Yeah.
never know.
Yeah, Christina, you're right. And actually, you make me think in those misunderstandings, that you mentioned, don't knowing all those details. And I don't know if you have a concrete example, because I think that that become very challenging, in terms of communication. What are those small details that can really make the difference? So if you can share with us one of those examples when you realize, well, this is a failure in the communication, it would be lovely.
Absolutely. I had this pretty sad experience, and I think the stories of our failures are always very illustrative and gives us a lot of learning material. I had this failure of a communication in one Arab country
Mm.
with two of my partners. One of them was coming from Europe, another was local Arab, and we were discussing an event where we wanted to invite a speaker to deliver some information. And our Arab partner was very willing to bring on a relative on board
Okay.
who was competent enough according to their words, and we were considering this person as a speaker. But suddenly there was another person who was on our radar and who looked like a bit more matching the expectations for the speaker's position. We started discussing another candidacy. Well, my very honest and very transparent approach that my European partner would appreciate was that I clearly explained the reasons why we would prioritize another speaker rather than our Arab partner's relative. And we definitely see the reasons behind that. That is why, if that's possible, we would kindly like to ask if they could please stay on hold for a while until we maybe confirm or maybe don't confirm our second option speaker. And that was a disaster. That was a
Oh.
real disaster because the Arab partner felt extremely offended. They felt like they were betrayed. They felt like we were not even considerate enough to think of a nicer way to put the reason to not make them feel offended and not make them convey this idea to their relatives. So what they've done for us was definitely a good gesture, offering somebody they know, introducing them to us. But what we were basing our opinion on was a very transparent style of communication, one thing. Second is a very clear setting of expectations within the timeline so that the other person would be aware of that situation. And also the so-called merit-based approach, which means that when we are considering two options, what we're seeing behind those options are not just relationships or connections. What we're seeing is their actual speaking capacity or their expertise. And that was the priority for the project. That was definitely not at that moment the way our Arab partner wanted us to communicate this. So we could definitely prioritize a second speaker, but the way we could communicate that would have been different. And that was one of the very good lessons I've learned. And I've got multiple of other examples like that. Many
I
of our
can imagine. I can imagine. I can imagine. This is, I know that then people will be able to contact you because you have a lot of value information. And related with that, I just wanted to ask you, because challenges is something that give us a lot of lessons to learn. That was one of those, and you give us a clear example. But in your career doing this intercultural communication, what probably will be the most challenging things that you have been facing?
That is a very good question. And I should say that The challenge comes from the very nature of my business, because I mostly work with commercial companies and with individuals who are interested in developing either business contacts or academic contacts, professional contacts. So I'm not directly connected at the moment to any academic institution, and I'm not involved in any research. So from this nature comes a very clear challenge that all of my clients want extremely practical explanations, examples, and recommendations. To be very blunt and honest, they want the do's and the don'ts. They come to me with an existing situation in their intercultural team, or they come with a hypothetical situation about a future negotiation with a foreign partner or with a foreign entity of their company. What they come to me and they ask, what should we do? And as a consultant, as a tutor, they are expecting me to give them a clear, definitive answer that if you go to country A, B is what you should do, and C is what you should not do. But the clear ultimate challenge is that, first, we live in the world of super diversity. There are no longer clear, pure entities, and there were never before, but there still was a concept that if you go back 5 centuries, then you will have a pure image of a Japanese person and a pure image of a French person. I'm not even sure that we would call French people French back 5 centuries ago. That's another good question. Anyway, so we would have a pure image of a representative of a certain country. These days, in the era of super diversity, we live in the world where people come from different backgrounds, where people follow different religions, speak different languages, even within one and the same country. And I'm not even speaking about foreigners who come to live there, but I'm sure if you go a little bit deeper into, let's say, socioeconomic background of China, you would see a dramatic difference between the North and the South, but between different ethnic groups, between different dialects, let alone you go to, let's say, India. Yeah, hundreds of dialects, hundreds of ethnic groups, and they're all very different, united by one name, Indian. And people do want to know, okay, Chris, what should I do when I go to India and what should I not? So the biggest challenge is to try to explain to your business clients, very practical people, very busy, who have very little time, and they want to like clear bullet points, very clear executive recommendations, to explain them that you're not dealing with a culture, you're always dealing with a person.
With people, yeah.
Exactly. And even though certain cultural background and facts that I'm happy to provide, as well as statistics, can help you shape a certain expectation, that should not be used to stereotype on those people. And so the challenge is that most businesses are like, yeah, but that doesn't help me make a successful negotiation. So you always have to balance between giving some specific recommendations and at the same time making sure you develop intercultural awareness and sensitivity with the people. That's a challenging thing to do. People don't really want to develop some sensitivity. They want the answers.
Yeah, they want the things more clear and right away. I mean, it's something that happen always, and part of that, and being part of these multicultural environments. I will love you to share a little bit more personal preferences, just to let our audiences know you a little bit more. And I want to ask you if you have a preference of any of those cultures that you have been exploring until now. Do you have any preference for one of those cultures?
That is a very good question. I would not say this way that I have one specific culture where I feel the most at home at the moment, because back in my home culture, there were certainly things that I appreciated and that I nurtured, but there were other things that were kind of discomfortable for me. For example, I'm generally a very cheerful, very positive person. And especially for a young lady in business, that was very often seen as a sign of being not serious enough. And a part of my failures, intercultural failures, happened in my own country, happened in my own culture. So especially male, in their middle age and above, they would sometimes not see me as a reliable and as a, let's say, serious partner, because I was always very smiling and cheerful and positive and humorous, etc. And this is quite the contrary of a version they would see of a serious partner. So that is one thing. But I would say that probably I would be able to give you the characteristics of the cultures that I find the most relatable to me. So first and foremost, I really like cultures that encompass diversity. So I would say I feel quite at ease in any expat community across the world.
Yeah.
So when I meet people who have already traveled and have already explored several cultures, or you can also say bicultural children or third culture children, children who were raised in mixed marriages, or children of migrants who moved a generation ago, those are the people that I easily click with, especially yet again, in a foreign country, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Those people who have had multicultural experience is already kind of my gang. Another important feature for me is to be able to maintain transparency in communication. So, let's say they're called low context cultures, cultures that are more direct in communication, that are less suggesting you to read between the lines. That's also much easier for me. Doesn't mean that I didn't learn from the example of my Arab partner, and I didn't learn to be within the community of high context culture people.
Yeah.
I did, but it just feel more comfortable and more at ease in more low context cultures. And also, I should probably say that I do appreciate soft and gentle but honest feedback, which is a very rare combination. Usually, people do soft and sweet and indirect feedback, or very direct and not soft at all. But this is my kind of cultural feature that I also feel that I appreciate much.
Yeah, it's a mix of. It's very intercultural, I guess, because having having just one that have all these beautiful ingredients. Because it's true, we are treating with human beings, so we need to be adapted basically of different cultures through what they are doing. And just to start to wrap up, that have been an amazing information that you have been delivered until now. And just my last question is if you want to give us some information related with how that can go to women empowerment through the lens of branding related with our intercultural conversation.
Yeah, um, that is a great question. First off, I do believe that in the 21st century, pretty much every person is a combination of different cultures. And that does not only relate to national cultures, again, that relates to professional cultures, to generational cultures, and to gender cultures. So many more different layers and details. And my advice would probably be to go and explore your multicultural nature, go and explore your multicultural ingredients that you have, and embrace more than just your national or your gender culture, and go beyond that. Explore what else you have in yourself and what else you can already use to make the world a better place, to connect better with other people, to express so that other people can feel a connection with you. So I would really recommend people to play around those different identities that they have, explore the beautiful melodies that can be created from utilizing different features of their identities, and not being scared of sharing the ones that are maybe very deep inside, or sometimes, as I mentioned, some of our identities, yeah, can be hard to express for certain contexts. I just think that it's worth it, because this is what makes you yourself.
That is beautiful, and especially, and that's just resonate with the authenticity that we all have and we can express in order to just be ourselves. And that will really generate more trust in people around us. Doesn't matter the culture, what they are coming from. I don't know if, Chris, you want to add something else that probably you wanted to say right now in order for us to give a beautiful closing to this episode.
Thank you very much, Maria. That's probably the most important thing that I wanted to say. I do believe that was a beautiful conversation. And if some of our listeners would reveal a new part of their nature as a result of this conversation, I'd be super excited. But for sure, I'd be happy if our listeners leave a comment or ask another question so that the dialogue continues. I do appreciate a dialogue a lot. So yeah, my call to action is just to share your thoughts, leave questions, or maybe answer some of the questions that we have posed in this conversation.
I will add a little bit more, and is I have a new purpose, and is actually impacting more than 1,000 women in the short term. So if the people that are listening to this episode and are listening to us coming from whatever culture they are coming from, they are welcome to have a voice in the Brilliantly Rounded podcast. So we are going to spread this voice. And thank you, Kristina, for being here, for sharing your knowledge and your open mind and being part of the different cultures. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and everyone take care.
I'm grateful by having you as a listener on this episode. I am in the mission of empowering thousands of women around the globe, and I need your support for that. Help me to spread the voice by sharing this episode and subscribe to our social media channels. And remember, if you want to listen to exceptional stories and have someone that inspires you, please get in touch with me, because I would love to have them as a guest to learn from their experience and share their story with you next time. So until the next episode, ciao, ciao.